a child star in the spotlight. JonBenét Ramsey was only 6 years old when she became the center of one of the most infamous murder investigations in modern American history. With her blonde hair, blue eyes, and radiant smile, JonBenét was a beloved beauty pageant star, already holding titles like Little Miss Colorado and National Tiny Miss Beauty. She lived in a large 3-story home in Boulder, Colorado with her affluent family. Her father, John Ramsey, was the president of a successful computer firm, and her mother, Patsy Ramsey, a former Miss West Virginia, was deeply involved in her daughter's pageant life. JonBenét's older brother, Burke, was a quiet and reserved 9-year-old. From the outside, the Ramseys seemed like the perfect American family, wealthy, well-known, and picture-perfect. But all of that changed on the morning after Christmas. The morning everything changed. December 26, 1996, started like any other day in the Ramsey household, until it took a horrifying turn. At around 5:30 a.m., Patsy Ramsey walked down the back staircase of their Boulder, Colorado home. What she found would change everything. Sitting on the steps was a handwritten ransom note. It claimed that her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét, had been kidnapped. The note demanded a ransom of $118,000, in an unusual and oddly specific amount. It just so happened to match the exact sum of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus from work that year. The letter itself was bizarre. It was unusually long, over 2.5 pages, and filled with strange language and dramatic phrases. Even more unsettling, it had been written using pen and paper from inside the house, suggesting the kidnapper had taken time and felt comfortable enough to write it there. Despite the kidnapper's warning not to contact authorities, Patsy didn't hesitate. She called 911 immediately. Her voice was panicked, telling the dispatcher, "We have a kidnapping, hurry!" Police officers arrived at the scene quickly, but what followed would become one of the most criticized crime scene investigations in history. The Ramsey home was not properly secured. Friends, neighbors, and even the family's pastor were allowed to enter, wandering freely through the house. In doing so, they may have unintentionally tampered with or destroyed vital evidence. As the morning unfolded, the situation only grew more confusing. Officers tried to treat the case as a kidnapping, but there were already signs that something wasn't quite right, and the most shocking discovery was yet to come. What happened next would turn this case into one of the most haunting and controversial mysteries in American history. A grim discovery in the basement. As the hours ticked by on that cold December morning, the tension inside the Ramsey home grew heavier. Despite the chilling ransom note, there had been no call, no message, no sign from the supposed kidnappers. Law enforcement remained at the scene, still treating the case as a possible abduction. But behind the scenes, suspicion was growing, and so was the sense that something was deeply wrong. Around 1 p.m., a detective asked John Ramsey and a family friend, Fleet White, to search the house from top to bottom. Though the home had already been looked through earlier that day, this time John decided to check the basement more thoroughly. It was there in a small, windowless storage room tucked away in a back corner that he made a devastating discovery. On the cold cement floor lay the body of his 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét. She was wrapped in a white blanket. Her mouth was covered with duct tape. Her wrists were tied with a nylon cord, and around her neck was a crude garrote, a homemade weapon fashioned from one of Patsy's broken paintbrushes, and more cord. The scene was chilling, heartbreaking, and deeply disturbing. In a moment of shock and grief, John picked up JonBenét's body and carried her upstairs. But in doing so, he unknowingly disturbed what was now a murder scene, further compromising evidence that could have helped investigators understand what had happened. The case was no longer a kidnapping. It was now a homicide. And the early missteps, from the unsecured crime scene to the contamination of critical evidence, would go on to haunt the investigation for decades. The discovery of JonBenét's body only deepened the mystery surrounding her tragic death. The ransom note, a scripted distraction? From the very start, the ransom note found in the Ramsey home raised numerous red flags. Unlike typical ransom notes, which are usually brief and straightforward, this one was unusually long, over 2.5 pages. It rambled with dramatic and theatrical language, almost reading like a script from a movie, rather than a genuine demand from a desperate kidnapper. The writer claimed to represent a mysterious, small foreign faction, a vague and puzzling phrase that sounded more like fiction than reality. The ransom amount itself was another odd detail, $118,000, a strangely specific figure that matched exactly the Christmas bonus John Ramsey had received just weeks earlier. This coincidence was too precise to ignore. It suggested the author knew the family's financial details, raising the possibility that the note was written by someone close to or inside the household. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered an even more unsettling fact. A draft version of the ransom note was found in the same notepad as the final note, both pages clearly written on paper that belonged to the Ramsey home. This discovery meant the note had not been brought in by an outsider, but was instead written inside the house, likely while the family was asleep. To detectives, this strongly indicated the ransom note was a staged distraction crafted to mislead law enforcement and the public. It appeared designed to create the illusion of a kidnapping, covering up the real crime that had already taken place within the home. This finding added weight to suspicions that the tragedy was an inside job and complicated the investigation by shifting the focus from an unknown intruder to those closest to JonBenét. No signs of forced entry. Despite the ransom note's claim that JonBenét had been kidnapped, the evidence inside and outside the Ramsey home told a different story, one that made the idea of a stranger breaking in seem highly unlikely. Police carefully examined the house and its surroundings, but found no signs of forced entry. There were no broken windows, no damaged doors, and no scratches or marks that would indicate someone had pried their way inside. What's more, the snow outside the home that Christmas morning was fresh and undisturbed. No footprints, tire tracks, or any indication that someone had entered or left the property. Inside the house, JonBenét's bedroom was also telling. Her room was neat and undisturbed, nothing out of place, no signs of a struggle or forced removal. This absence of disorder suggested she was not taken by force from her bed or her room. The layout of the Ramsey home added to the mystery. The house was large and complex, with multiple levels and a maze-like basement that twisted and turned. For an intruder to enter unnoticed, find JonBenét's bedroom in the dark, and then quietly carry her through the confusing layout to the basement without waking anyone would have required detailed knowledge of the home. These facts raised serious doubts about the kidnapping scenario. If no one broke in, and there were no signs of a break-in, then who could have committed this crime? Investigators began to suspect that the perpetrator was someone inside the home, someone who knew the house well, its secrets and hidden passages, and who could carry out such a terrible act without detection. This lack of forced entry remains one of the strongest pieces of evidence pointing toward an inside job, and has been a crucial factor shaping many of the theories that surround the case to this day. Forensic red flags and unanswered questions. The autopsy of JonBenét Ramsey revealed disturbing findings. She had suffered a deep skull fracture, as well as signs of strangulation, indicating that her death involved more than one traumatic injury. These details led experts to believe she may have first been struck on the head and then strangled afterward, though the sequence of events is still debated. Adding to the mystery was the discovery of pineapple in her stomach. This was puzzling because both John and Patsy Ramsey claimed JonBenét had gone straight to bed after returning home from a Christmas party. Yet in the kitchen, police found a bowl of pineapple and milk sitting on the counter. Fingerprints on the bowl belonged to Patsy and JonBenét's older brother, Burke. Then there was the DNA evidence. Investigators found unidentified male DNA on JonBenét's underwear and clothing. Initially, this seemed like a major breakthrough. It did not match John, Burke, or any known suspects at the time. Some believed this unknown DNA could belong to the true killer. However, as DNA analysis advanced, some experts suggested the sample may have been transferred during the manufacturing process, meaning it might have come from someone who handled the clothing in a factory, not a perpetrator. These conflicting pieces of evidence only raised more questions than answers. Theories inside the home. The accident theory, Patsy Ramsey. One of the most widely discussed theories is that JonBenét's death may have been a tragic accident, According to this theory, she wet the bed during the night and, in a moment of frustration, Patsy Ramsey reacted harshly, possibly striking her daughter in a way that caused a fatal head injury. Fearing scandal and damage to their reputation, the theory goes, the Ramseys staged the crime scene to make it appear like a kidnapping. Supporters of this idea point to the long, dramatic ransom note written with Patsy's notepad and pen, the use of her paintbrush to construct the garrote, and her wearing the same clothes the next morning, perhaps too distraught to change. It remains one of the many theories that continue to fuel debate and speculation to this day. The sibling theory, Burke Ramsey. Another theory that has circulated widely over the years focuses on JonBenét's older brother, Burke Ramsey, who was 9 years old at the time of her death. Central to this theory is the bowl of pineapple and milk found on the kitchen counter. Both Patsy's and Burke's fingerprints were on the bowl, and some believe this suggests Burke may have been eating a late-night snack with his sister present. According to this theory, an argument may have erupted between the siblings, possibly over the pineapple, and in a moment of anger or frustration, Burke allegedly struck JonBenét with a nearby object. A flashlight found in the kitchen became a key point of discussion. The head injury detailed in JonBenét's autopsy was consistent in size and shape with that flashlight, though police were never able to conclusively prove it was the weapon used. Supporters of this theory argue that after realizing the severity of the injury, or possibly that JonBenét had died, John and Patsy chose to protect their son by staging the scene to resemble a kidnapping. The detailed ransom note, the garrote, and the lack of forced entry are all cited as elements that could have been part of a hastily arranged cover-up. Burke wasn't formally interviewed by police until several weeks after JonBenét's death, which many found suspicious. Then in 2016, nearly 2 decades later, Burke gave a televised interview on Dr. Phil. His quiet, emotionless demeanor during the conversation reignited public scrutiny, with many viewers interpreting his behavior as odd or unsettling. That same year, a CBS documentary presented a theory implicating Burke in his sister's death. In response, the Ramseys filed a $750 million defamation lawsuit against the network. The case was later settled out of court, but the controversy never fully died down. The outsider suspects. While much of the public focus has remained on the Ramsey family, investigators also explored several potential suspects outside the home, each with their own troubling background or connection to the case. Gary Oliva. Gary Oliva, a known sex offender living in Boulder at the time of JonBenét's death, quickly drew suspicion. He had a disturbing criminal record involving children and was later found with photos of JonBenét in his possession. Even more unsettling, Oliva reportedly called a friend shortly after the murder, sobbing and saying he had hurt a little girl. Though these facts raised alarms, forensic testing told a different story. His DNA did not match the sample found on JonBenét's clothing. With no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, Oliva was never charged. Michael Helgoth was another suspect who drew attention due to some cryptic behavior. He had ties to explosives and reportedly told an acquaintance he expected a large financial payout around the time of the murder. Just days after police announced they were closing in on a suspect, Helgoth was found dead from a gunshot wound in what was ruled a suicide. The timing was suspicious, but once again, there was no physical evidence placing him at the Ramsey home. John Mark Carr. Perhaps the most infamous outsider suspect was John Mark Carr, who confessed to JonBenét's murder in 2006 while living in Thailand. He claimed it was an accident and that he had loved her. However, Carr got several key details wrong, details that had never been made public, and his DNA did not match. Authorities concluded his confession was false, likely a bizarre attempt to gain attention. Santa Bill McReynolds. Bill McReynolds was a family friend who played Santa Claus and visited the Ramseys shortly before the murder. Investigators noted that his wife had once written a fictional story that eerily resembled the circumstances of JonBenét's death. Still, McReynolds fully cooperated with the investigation, passed a polygraph test, and was ultimately cleared of any involvement. Legal proceedings and grand jury findings. As the investigation dragged on with no arrests, public pressure mounted for answers. In 1999, nearly 3 years after JonBenét's death, a Boulder County grand jury was convened to review the evidence in secret. After months of testimony and deliberation, the grand jury made a surprising decision. They voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey. The charges included child abuse resulting in death and being accessories after the fact. The grand jury concluded that while the parents may not have killed JonBenét directly, they had allegedly allowed her to be placed in a dangerous situation and possibly helped cover up the crime afterward. But despite the indictment, District Attorney Alex Hunter chose not to move forward with prosecution. He announced that the evidence was simply too weak to support a criminal trial. Hunter stated there was insufficient evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and without a strong case, any attempt to prosecute would likely fail. This decision sparked outrage from some members of the public who believed the Ramseys were being protected due to their wealth and status. However, others saw it as a responsible move, given the uncertainty surrounding the case. In the years that followed, advancements in DNA testing brought new developments. Touch DNA analysis, far more sensitive than methods available in the 1990s, found that an unknown male profile was present on JonBenét's clothing. Crucially, it did not match any Ramsey family member. In 2008, the Boulder District Attorney's Office formally cleared the Ramseys of involvement based on this new evidence and issued a public apology. Despite this, the court of public opinion remained divided, and suspicion continued to linger. Proof that in the case of JonBenét Ramsey, even facts couldn't silence speculation. A case that refuses to be forgotten. Nearly 3 decades have passed since the tragic morning of December 26, 1996. Yet the mystery of JonBenét Ramsey's death remains unsolved. Her story continues to haunt the American consciousness. A 6-year-old beauty queen whose life ended in the safety of her own home, under circumstances still clouded in confusion and controversy. Despite numerous investigations, grand jury proceedings, documentaries, and books, no one has ever been convicted or even officially charged with JonBenét's murder. The case remains open, technically unsolved, and one of the most infamous cold cases in modern history. JonBenét's name has become a tragic symbol, not just of a life cut short, but of justice denied. The investigation into her death revealed serious flaws in the early police response, from allowing people to enter the crime scene to delays in formally interviewing key witnesses. These missteps likely compromised critical evidence that could have helped solve the case in its early days. At the same time, the media's obsession with the case turned it into a national spectacle. Sensational headlines, tabloid rumors, and televised theories created a public frenzy that often overshadowed the real facts. The Ramseys were tried in the court of public opinion long before any evidence was fully understood. The case also highlighted how deeply public opinion can shape and sometimes distort investigations. Conflicting theories, biased speculation, and misinformation have made it difficult to separate fact from fiction. Still, JonBenét's case continues to inspire new analysis, documentaries, podcasts, and debates. Advances in forensic technology offer a sliver of hope that one day, the truth will come to light. Until then, the world remembers JonBenét not just for her tragic death, but for the unanswered questions that continue to echo decades later. Final thoughts. JonBenét never lived to see the year 1997. Instead, she became the center of one of America's most tragic and puzzling crimes. Was her death the result of a tragic accident, a family cover-up, or the work of a disturbed outsider? The evidence is conflicting. Theories abound, but one truth remains. Someone knows what happened that night. Until that truth is uncovered, JonBenét's story continues to challenge our understanding of justice and our determination to seek it.